Flames engulfed everything as Chloe lunged toward danger. The acrid smell of burning metal seared her nostrils as she pulled the stranger from death's embrace, never recognizing the face of the man who'd once destroyed her livelihood. Single mom saved a stranger from the fire would become headline news, but headlines never reveal the scorching truth beneath sacrifice. Her scarred hands would tell a different story. The morning had begun with such promise, crisp autumn air filling Chloe Grant's lungs as she rehearsed interview answers in her head while navigating the freeway. 8 months of rejections had hardened her resolve, but not her heart. The weight of single motherhood pressing against her chest with each passing day. The position at Meridian Technologies represented more than just employment. It offered salvation from the mounting bills that threatened to drown her and 9-year-old Lila in a sea of impossible choices. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, nails digging into the worn leather as she pictured Lila's face this morning, sleepy-eyed but determined as she'd packed her own lunch, insisting that today would be different. Today would bring the change they so desperately needed. The traffic ahead slowed unexpectedly, a symphony of brake lights illuminating the otherwise gray morning. Chloe glanced nervously at the dashboard clock, calculating the remaining minutes before her interview slot would disappear like smoke. 32 minutes to travel 14 miles in this crawling procession of metal and frustration. She inhaled deeply, forcing the panic down into the recesses of her chest, where it had lived since that fateful day at Hayes Logistics, the day the floor had fallen out from beneath her stable world. The memory of that corporate axe still cut fresh, company-wide restructuring they'd called it, as if changing the language somehow softened the devastating impact on the lives caught in its blade. The first plume of black smoke appeared on the horizon like an ominous thundercloud, drawing Chloe's attention away from her anxious calculations. Something primal shifted in her chest as she watched the smoke thicken and rise, a dark beacon against the pale morning sky. Traffic had completely stopped now, drivers emerging from their vehicles to stare at the growing spectacle ahead. Without fully comprehending her own actions, Chloe pulled her car to the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in rhythmic warning as she stepped onto the asphalt. The smoke grew denser as she jogged forward, each step carrying her closer to a scene that would alter the trajectory of her carefully planned morning, her meticulously structured interview day, her desperately calculated future. The source of the smoke materialized through the haze, a luxury sedan crumpled against the concrete divider, flames licking hungrily at its engine compartment. Time seemed to simultaneously accelerate and slow as Chloe registered the driver still inside, slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious or worse. Bodies lined the shoulder of the road, smartphones raised like perverse totems to document the unfolding tragedy, but not a single person moved toward the burning vehicle. Later, she would struggle to articulate what propelled her forward when self-preservation screamed retreat. Perhaps the lingering ghost of her father who'd taught her that courage wasn't about fearlessness, but about action, despite terror. Or maybe simply the knowledge that she couldn't live with herself if she'd merely watched death claim another soul from a safe distance. Heat assaulted her face as she approached, the metal of the door handle searing her palm as she wrenched it open. Smoke immediately engulfed her, filling her lungs with toxic fumes that burned from the inside out. The man inside was large, unconscious but breathing, his expensive suit incongruously pristine against the chaos of the wreckage. With strength born of desperation, Chloe unfastened his seatbelt and braced herself against the doorframe, muscles screaming as she pulled his dead weight from the vehicle. His features remained obscured by smoke, and her single-minded focus on the critical seconds ticking by before the flames reached the fuel tank. She dragged him across asphalt, skin scraping against concrete, until the heat diminished and strangers finally rushed forward to help, their earlier paralysis broken by her decisive action. Only when they reached safety, collapsed on the ground a safe distance from the burning wreckage, did she truly see the stranger's face, older than when she'd last encountered him. Lines of stress etched more deeply around his eyes, but unmistakably Dominic Hayes. Recognition crashed through her consciousness like a physical blow, memories flooding back of the man whose signature had appeared on the company-wide layoff notice, whose cost-cutting decisions had upended her carefully constructed world. As if sensing her recognition, His eyes fluttered open momentarily, unfocused and confused, meeting hers without a flicker of familiarity, before consciousness slipped away once more. The interview at Meridian Technologies receded into impossibility as sirens wailed in the distance, and Chloe realized with bitter clarity that she had just risked her life to save the very man who had once deemed her dispensable. The hospital waiting room pulsed with fluorescent sterility, the antiseptic smell burning Chloe's nostrils nearly as severely as the smoke had hours earlier. Her interview clothes, carefully selected and pressed the night before, now hung smoke-damaged and rumpled against her exhausted frame. The bandages wrapped around her palms concealed first-degree burns, minor injuries according to the emergency room doctor, who had treated her with efficient dispassion before moving on to more urgent cases. Her phone displayed 5 missed calls from Meridian Technologies. The final opportunity evaporated with each unanswered ring. She could have left hours ago, should have left immediately after giving her statement to the highway patrol, yet something inexplicable anchored her to this uncomfortable plastic chair, some need for completion or closure that she couldn't articulate even to herself. A woman in an immaculate suit approached, her heels clicking a precise rhythm against the linoleum floor. "Ms. Grant, I'm Victoria Landry, Mr. Hayes' executive assistant. The doctor says he's stabilized and asking about the person who helped him." Her voice carried the polished efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises without revealing emotion. "He'd like to see you, if you're willing." The request hung between them, an unexpected development that stirred something uncomfortable in Chloe's chest. Not quite anger, not quite curiosity, but a turbulent mixture of emotions she hadn't anticipated when she'd impulsively decided to remain at the hospital. Perhaps she'd stayed precisely for this moment, to look into the eyes of the man whose corporate decisions had cascaded into years of struggle for her family, to confirm that he was as coldly calculating in person as the impersonal termination notice had suggested. The private room exuded quiet luxury even within the institutional constraints of the hospital setting. Dominic Hayes sat propped against pillows, an oxygen cannula beneath his nose the only visible sign of his ordeal. His eyes, sharp blue and disconcertingly alert, tracked her entrance with undisguised interest. "Ms. Grant," he said, his voice stronger than she'd expected. "They tell me I owe you my life." Up close, he seemed both more and less than the corporate photograph that had accompanied the layoff announcements 3 years earlier, more human in his current vulnerability, less imposing without the trappings of his executive office. Yet his presence still commanded the space with an authority that seemed intrinsic rather than conferred. Chloe nodded stiffly, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance, of the lingering smell of smoke clinging to her hair, of the years of resentment suddenly crystallizing in this unexpected confrontation. "I'm told the car might have exploded if not for your intervention," he continued when she remained silent. "Most people wouldn't have taken that risk for a stranger." Something flickered across his features. Genuine gratitude, perhaps, or confusion at her obvious discomfort. "The doctors say I can expect a full recovery, thanks to you. I'd like to express my appreciation in a tangible way." His hand moved toward the bedside table where a checkbook lay, the gesture so casual it suggested someone accustomed to solving problems with financial solutions. "Name an amount that seems reasonable for saving a life, Ms. Grant, though I suspect no sum would truly be adequate." The offer landed between them like a physical object, heavy with implication and misunderstanding. In that moment, Chloe recognized with crystal clarity that he didn't remember her. She had been one name among hundreds on a spreadsheet, a cost-saving statistic rather than a human being with dreams and responsibilities, and a child who had cried herself to sleep the night after Chloe had brought home her final paycheck. "I didn't do it for a reward," she replied, the words emerging with unexpected steadiness despite the trembling she felt beneath her skin. "I didn't know who was in that car. I wouldn't have left anyone to burn, regardless of who they were." The subtle emphasis on who they were passed unnoticed as he studied her with increasing interest, perhaps mistaking her tension for simple modesty or discomfort with gratitude. "I should go. My daughter will be wondering where I am." She turned toward the door, suddenly desperate to escape the suffocating weight of this interaction. The bizarre intersection of their lives that felt both random and somehow inevitable. His voice stopped her at the threshold, curious and probing. "You seem familiar somehow. Have we met before?" The question hung suspended in the antiseptic air, loaded with a significance he couldn't possibly comprehend. She hesitated, one hand on the door handle, caught between honesty and self-preservation. "Yes," she finally answered, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. "I worked for Hayes Logistics for 7 years as a senior technician on the assembly floor. I was part of the mass layoff 3 years ago during your company-wide restructuring." The words emerged without bitterness, a simple statement of fact that nonetheless landed with visible impact. His expression shifted, recognition and something like discomfort flickering across features accustomed to boardroom impassivity. "I see," he said after a measured pause, his voice carefully neutral. "That makes your actions today even more remarkable." Chloe offered no response to this observation, no absolution for the guilt that now visibly shadowed his features. She simply nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than acceptance, and stepped through the doorway, leaving behind the man whose corporate decision had once shattered her world, and whom she had nonetheless pulled from flames without a moment's hesitation. 3 days later, the envelope arrived by courier, cream-colored stationery bearing the Hayes Logistics embossed letterhead, the paper heavy and expensive beneath Chloe's calloused fingers. Inside, a check with more zeros than she had ever seen on a personal document, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Heroism should be rewarded, regardless of complicated history. With deepest gratitude, Dominic Hayes." She stared at the check, at the amount that could instantly eliminate the mountain of debt that had accumulated during her prolonged unemployment, that could secure Lila's education fund, that could repair the perpetually leaking roof, and replace the aging car whose check engine light had become a permanent fixture on her dashboard. The paper trembled slightly in her grip, temptation warring with a deeper principle that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with dignity. Lila found her at the kitchen table, the check still clutched in her hand, internal conflict written plainly across her features. "What's that, Mom?" she asked, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder, curious eyes noting the unusual quality of the stationery and the intensity of her mother's expression. At 9 years old, Lila possessed an emotional acuity beyond her years, a perceptiveness honed by necessity as she navigated the complex emotional terrain of a household where financial stress was a constant undercurrent. Chloe hesitated, unsure how to explain the moral complexity of their current situation to a child who had witnessed firsthand the devastating aftermath of the Hayes Logistics layoffs, the missed meals, the tearful explanations about birthday presents that couldn't be afforded, the quiet desperation of late-night job searches while Lila supposedly slept, but instead listened through thin apartment walls to her mother's muffled tears. "It's a thank you from the man I helped on the freeway," Chloe finally answered, folding the check and tucking it back into the envelope. "He wants to give us money because I pulled him from the car." She deliberately omitted the connection to their past hardships, unwilling to burden Lila with the knowledge that this stranger was the architect of their most difficult years. Lila's brow furrowed in thought, her young face suddenly solemn with consideration. "Are you going to take it?" she asked, the question piercing directly to the heart of Chloe's dilemma. "We could fix the car and maybe move to that apartment near my school, the one with the swimming pool you said we couldn't afford." The simplicity of her daughter's calculation, money equals solutions, made Chloe's chest tighten with an emotion too complex to name. How to explain that accepting this money felt like acknowledging that her worth could be calculated in dollars, that the principles by which she had raised her daughter to live could be compromised for financial security? That evening, after Lila had fallen asleep, Chloe sat at their small kitchen table and composed her response on the only stationery she owned. Simple white paper from the dollar store, her handwriting neat but unpretentious against the cheap surface. "Mr. Hayes, I appreciate the gesture, but I cannot accept payment for doing what any decent person should do. I didn't save you because of who you are or what you could offer in return. I would have done the same for anyone in that situation. Please donate the money to a charity supporting single parents struggling after job loss if you truly wish to express gratitude. Respectfully, Chloe Grant. The words felt right as she wrote them, aligned with the core values she had fought to maintain, even when circumstances had tested her resolve to breaking points. She sealed the envelope containing his uncashed check along with her note, addressing it to the corporate headquarters whose location she still remembered with painful clarity. 2 weeks passed without response, autumn deepening toward winter, as Chloe continued her relentless job search, while picking up extra shifts at the hardware store that currently employed her at barely above minimum wage. The accident had faded from local news. The brief attention of reporters, seeking a human interest story about the heroic single mom, redirected to fresher tragedies and triumphs. She had almost convinced herself that the bizarre intersection with her former employer's CEO had reached its conclusion when the phone call came. Victoria Landry's crisp professional tone asking if Chloe might consider meeting with Mr. Hayes to discuss a matter of mutual interest. He was quite impressed by your letter, the assistant explained with carefully neutral inflection. And he's been doing some research into your employment history with Hayes Logistics. The request provoked immediate wariness, suspicion coiling through Chloe's thoughts as she considered the implications. What possible mutual interest could exist between them beyond the accident that had temporarily connected their disparate worlds? Yet curiosity, and perhaps a lingering need for resolution, prompted her reluctant agreement to the meeting. Victoria's efficiency manifested in the immediate arrangement of details: a time, a location, an upscale restaurant that Chloe recognized as far beyond her budget, and the assurance that a car would be sent for her convenience. The orchestration of these particulars reinforced the chasm between their respective realities. His world of executive assistants and car services, hers of bus schedules and carefully budgeted gas mileage. As she hung up the phone, Chloe wondered what possible outcome could emerge from this meeting that wouldn't leave her feeling diminished by comparison, or further entrenched in resentment for the inequality of their circumstances. The restaurant existed in a realm of quiet opulence that made Chloe acutely conscious of her practical clothing and unadorned appearance. Dominic Hayes rose as she approached the table, his recovery apparently complete, no visible evidence remaining of the accident that had nearly claimed his life. "Ms. Grant," he greeted her, gesturing toward the chair opposite his own. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." His manner carried a formality that seemed at odds with the casual luxury of their surroundings, as though he too felt the awkwardness of their situation, the bizarre circumstance that had brought together a corporate executive and a former employee, whose termination he had authorized without personal knowledge of her existence. A waiter materialized silently at her elbow, offering a wine list that Chloe declined with a small shake of her head, requesting water instead. She noticed with faint surprise that Hayes likewise opted for water, rather than the expensive wines she assumed would be standard fare in his world. "I've been looking into your employment record at Hayes Logistics," he began once they were alone, his direct approach bypassing small talk in a way that Chloe found unexpectedly refreshing. 7 years of exemplary service, multiple commendations for efficiency improvements on the assembly line, 2 patents filed for mechanical modifications that increased production by nearly 18%. His recitation of her professional accomplishments carried a tone of genuine respect that caught her off guard, the facts of her contributions clearly surprising to him despite his position at the company's helm. "You are highly valued by your immediate supervisors, Ms. Grant. I'm curious why you were included in the layoffs." The question seemed genuine rather than defensive, his expression suggesting that her case represented a puzzle he was actively trying to solve rather than an accusation he needed to deflect. The familiar spark of indignation flared in her chest at his apparent ignorance of the human cost of decisions made in boardrooms far removed from the factory floor. "Budget cuts don't discriminate based on performance, Mr. Hayes," she replied, unable to entirely mask the edge in her voice. "The directive was to reduce the technical staff by 30%. My department lost 12 people regardless of their contributions or potential. She paused, considering whether to voice the fuller truth that had crystallized during her months of unemployment. Corporations see employees as expenses first and assets second. When quarterly profits dip, the solution is always to eliminate expenses rather than invest in assets. The observation emerged with more bitterness than she'd intended. The accumulated frustration of 3 difficult years finding unexpected outlet in this surreal dining experience with the very architect of her financial downfall. Something shifted in his expression, not defensiveness as she might have expected, but a thoughtful consideration that suggested her words had landed with impact. "That's a fair assessment," he acknowledged after a moment, surprising her with his candor. "And an unfortunate reality of corporate culture that I've participated in without sufficient examination of the human consequences." He leaned forward slightly, his next words measured and deliberate. "The reason I asked you here extends beyond expressing gratitude for your heroism, Ms. Grant. I've recently learned that one of our primary assembly lines has been experiencing critical malfunctions that our current engineering team cannot resolve. The specifications you developed during your tenure are still considered the gold standard in our technical division. I'd like to offer you a consulting opportunity to examine the issue, compensated at executive consultation rates naturally." The proposal hung between them, unexpected and complex in its implications. Chloe studied him across the pristine white tablecloth, searching for hidden motives or patronizing charity disguised as professional opportunity. What she found instead was something that resembled genuine respect, perhaps even a hint of contrition carefully contained within professional boundaries. "This isn't about the accident," she stated rather than asked, needing clarity before considering his offer. "This is a legitimate technical problem?" He nodded, reaching for his phone and pulling up technical specifications and malfunction reports that he turned toward her. Despite herself, Chloe's trained eye immediately began analyzing the data, professional instincts engaging with the engineering challenge presented in the reports, even as her emotional response remained cautious and measured. As their meal progressed, the conversation shifted almost entirely to technical matters, the problematic assembly line, the modifications implemented after her departure, the cascading issues that had developed in recent months. Chloe found herself drawn into the puzzle despite her reservations, her mind working through possible solutions, with the practiced ease of someone intimately familiar with the machinery in question. By the time dessert arrived, which she declined but he ordered regardless, pushing the plate to the center of the table with an encouraging gesture, she had already mentally diagnosed several potential causes for the malfunctions. "I'll need to see the actual machinery," she found herself saying, professional curiosity overriding personal hesitation. "Schematics only tell part of the story." He nodded as though her acceptance had been inevitable, signaling for the check with a subtle gesture that spoke of years of practiced authority. "Tomorrow morning, then? I'll send a car at 8. The question was presented as a statement, an assumption of agreement that should have irritated her, but instead felt like an acknowledgement of her expertise. He needed her professional skills and seemed to harbor no doubt that she would rise to the challenge presented. The factory floor hummed with familiar energy, the symphony of machinery both nostalgic and jarring, after 3 years away from this environment. Chloe moved through the space with practiced confidence, her body remembering patterns of movement that her conscious mind had filed away as part of a painful past. Employees watched her passage with curious glances, her escort of senior management creating an unusual spectacle against the backdrop of routine production. Dominic Hayes walked beside her, his presence on the factory floor clearly an anomaly, based on the surprised reactions of workers who straightened imperceptibly as he passed. He introduced her to the current head engineer, Martin Voss, a man whose thin smile and watchful eyes immediately triggered Chloe's wariness. "Ms. Grant will be consulting on the TL7 line issues," Hayes explained, his tone brooking no argument despite Voss's visible discomfort with the arrangement. "Please ensure she has access to all relevant data and personnel." Once provided with proper safety equipment, Chloe approached the malfunctioning assembly line with focused attention. All personal history temporarily set aside as professional instincts took precedence. The TL-7 represented the company's flagship production line, responsible for components that formed the backbone of Hayes Logistics' reputation for precision engineering. Within minutes of observation, her trained eye caught subtle irregularities in the machine's rhythm, microscopic hesitations in movements that should have flowed with seamless precision. Voss hovered nearby, his commentary a constant undercurrent of technical justifications and explanations that Chloe largely tuned out, focusing instead on the machinery's actual performance rather than the engineer's interpretation of it. She ran her hand along a junction point, feeling vibrations that signaled misalignment at a fundamental level, problems that transcended the surface-level adjustments Voss kept emphasizing in his increasingly defensive monologue. "I need to see the maintenance logs for the past 18 months, she requested, interrupting Voss mid-explanation, "and the modification approvals since the line was recalibrated." Her direct approach visibly irritated the engineer, whose professional territory was being invaded by a former employee with no current standing in the company hierarchy. Nevertheless, Hayes's authoritative nod compelled Voss's compliance, though his departure to retrieve the requested documents carried the stiff-shouldered tension of professional affront. Once alone with Hayes beside the temporarily halted assembly line, Chloe allowed herself a moment of candor. "There's a fundamental design flaw in the recalibration," she stated, confidence born of expertise rather than arrogance. "Whoever approved these modifications either didn't understand the original engineering principles or deliberately ignored safety protocols to increase production speed." Hayes's expression darkened at this assessment, concern replacing his previous professional neutrality. "Are you suggesting deliberate negligence?" The question carried weight beyond simple technical inquiry, touching on corporate liability and ethical considerations that clearly registered in his suddenly alert posture. Chloe chose her words carefully, aware of the implications of her assessment. "I'm stating that these modifications violate basic engineering principles that were documented extensively in the original design. The original safety margins have been compromised to achieve faster production cycles. It's not just inefficient, it's potentially dangerous." The gravity of her conclusion settled between them, the human stake suddenly overshadowing the financial implications of the malfunctioning machinery. Voss returned with the requested documentation, his manner increasingly hostile as Chloe methodically reviewed the logs, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed gaps in the maintenance schedule and questionable approvals for modifications that contradicted original design specifications. The tension escalated when she identified a critical safety bypass that had been implemented 6 months earlier, a modification that bore Voss's approval signature but violated fundamental engineering standards. "This shouldn't have passed basic safety review," she noted, looking directly at Voss with uncompromising professional judgment. "It creates a potential catastrophic failure point if the system experiences even minor power fluctuations." The engineer's face flushed with angry defense as he launched into technical justifications that grew increasingly convoluted under Hayes's scrutiny. Chloe remained silent during this exchange, allowing the technical facts she had uncovered to speak for themselves, rather than engaging in professional confrontation. By late afternoon, Chloe had compiled a comprehensive analysis of the system's flaws and developed a detailed proposal for corrections that would restore both efficiency and safety margins. She presented her findings in the conference room adjacent to the factory floor, her confidence growing as she outlined specific modifications with the precision that had once made her an invaluable asset to the company. Hayes listened with focused attention, occasionally asking questions that revealed a deeper technical understanding than she had initially credited him with possessing. Voss sat stiffly at the opposite end of the table, his interjections becoming increasingly sparse as the thoroughness of Chloe's analysis made his defensive posture increasingly untenable. When she concluded her presentation, the room fell into a weighted silence, broken eventually by Hayes's decisive voice. "Implement Ms. Grant's recommendations immediately. Production remains suspended until all safety modifications are complete and verified. The pronouncement triggered visible alarm in Voss, who protested the production delay with increasing agitation. "We have delivery deadlines for 3 major clients this week. Suspension will cost millions in penalty clauses." His objection focused entirely on financial implications, rather than addressing the safety concerns Chloe had meticulously documented. Hayes regarded the engineer with a measured stare that effectively silenced further protest. "Ms. Grant has identified critical safety issues that affect not only production efficiency, but worker safety. No delivery deadline justifies compromising either." The unequivocal support for her assessment caught Chloe by surprise. The corporate executive prioritizing safety and engineering integrity over immediate financial considerations, in a way that contradicted her long-held assumptions about his values and priorities. As the meeting concluded and implementation teams were assembled, Chloe found herself reevaluating not only the machinery she had analyzed, but also the man who now relied on her expertise to correct dangerous flaws that his own engineering team had either missed or deliberately ignored. 3 days of intensive work transformed the production line from a dangerous liability into a model of efficiency and safety. Chloe's hands bore fresh calluses as she personally supervised the implementation of each modification, her body remembering the physical demands of factory work that her current job at the hardware store had only partially maintained. She worked alongside technicians who initially regarded her with skepticism, that gradually transformed into respect as her expertise became increasingly evident. Voss remained conspicuously absent during the reconstruction process, his opposition to the project manifesting in bureaucratic obstacles that Chloe navigated with determined efficiency. Hayes appeared periodically throughout the process, his presence on the factory floor becoming less unusual with each visit, workers gradually relaxing their rigid formality as he engaged directly with their concerns and observations about the modifications underway. On the morning of the 4th day, the restored assembly line hummed to life under Chloe's watchful supervision, each component moving with synchronized precision, the subtle vibrations and hesitations completely eliminated from the system's operation. Production metrics displayed on the monitoring screens showed immediate improvements. Efficiency increased by 22%, while operating temperatures decreased to optimal ranges, indicating reduced stress on critical components. The technical team erupted into spontaneous applause as the first perfectly produced components emerged from the line, validation of days of intensive labor and Chloe's engineering vision. She accepted their acknowledgement with quiet pride, the familiar sense of professional accomplishment washing over her like a forgotten pleasure, momentarily overshadowing the complicated circumstances that had brought her back to this environment. The celebration was interrupted by Voss's arrival, accompanied by a senior executive Chloe didn't recognize. A silver-haired man whose expensive suit and commanding presence suggested significant authority within the corporate hierarchy. "Richard, excellent timing," Hayes greeted the newcomer, gesturing toward the functioning assembly line. "You're just in time to witness the successful resolution of our production issues." The senior executive, evidently Richard Kessler based on the deferential reactions of nearby managers, surveyed the operation with calculated assessment, his gaze eventually settling on Chloe with evaluative interest. "Impressive turnaround," he acknowledged with professional neutrality. "Martin has been briefing me on the innovative solutions his team implemented. Quite ingenious modifications to overcome the design limitations." The statement hung in the air for a suspended moment, its audacity stunning Chloe into temporary silence. Hayes's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, his attention swinging to Voss, who maintained an expression of practiced professionalism, despite the blatant misrepresentation of responsibility. "Actually, Richard," Hayes corrected with deceptive mildness that nevertheless carried unmistakable authority, "the solutions were entirely designed and implemented by Ms. Grant, our consulting engineer. Martin's team has been supporting her directives." The clarification landed with precision, Kessler's eyebrows rising slightly as he reassessed the situation and the dynamics at play. Voss's face tightened with suppressed anger, his attempt to claim credit for Chloe's work exposed with public finality, that would inevitably damage his professional standing. Kessler recovered quickly, extending his hand toward Chloe with revised appreciation. "Exceptional work, Ms. Grant. The board will be pleased to hear that production has not only resumed but improved." His acknowledgement carried the weight of corporate validation. Yet Chloe found herself strangely unmoved by the approval of executives who had likely been complicit in the layoff decisions that had once devastated her financial security. She accepted the handshake with professional courtesy, but directed her response to the technicians who had actually implemented the changes under her guidance. The credit belongs to the entire team. Their knowledge of the system made these improvements possible in record time. Her redirection of praise to the factory workers rather than management did not go unnoticed, Hayes watching the interaction with thoughtful assessment, while Voss's expression darkened further at her implicit rebuke of his attempted appropriation. Later that afternoon, Hayes requested Chloe's presence in his office, a space she had never entered during her previous employment, its expansive windows overlooking the factory complex from an elevation that symbolized the separation between corporate decision-makers and the workforce they directed. "I owe you an apology," he began once they were seated, the admission catching her entirely off guard. "Not just for today's attempt to steal credit for your work, which will be addressed separately with appropriate consequences." He paused, seeming to gather thoughts that had clearly been percolating throughout their unusual collaboration. "I've spent the past week watching you work, Ms. Grant. Your technical brilliance, your leadership capabilities, your commitment to safety standards even when they required additional time and resources. You represent exactly the type of talent our company should value above all else. Yet our systems allowed you to be discarded as a budget line item during restructuring." The acknowledgement of her professional value, coming 3 years too late to prevent the hardships she and Lila had endured, stirred complicated emotions that Chloe carefully contained behind professional composure. Corporate structures aren't designed to recognize individual talent when reduction targets are set, she observed, the statement neither accusatory nor absolving, simply factual in its assessment of systems she had long since accepted as immutable realities of corporate employment. Hayes nodded, accepting the critique without defensiveness. "Systems can be changed when their flaws become evident," he countered, leaning forward with unexpected intensity. "I'd like to offer you a position heading our innovation division, developing safety and efficiency protocols across all production facilities, with authority to implement changes without navigating bureaucratic approval processes. Your work this week has demonstrated that our current engineering leadership lacks either the vision or the integrity to maintain our standards." The offer hung between them, unexpected and life-altering in its potential impact. Chloe studied the man across the desk, searching for signs of charity or guilt-driven compensation rather than genuine professional respect. "Is this because I pulled you from that car?" she asked directly, needing clarity about his motivations before considering a return to the company that had once deemed her dispensable. Hayes met her gaze with equal directness, something like admiration flickering across his features at her uncompromising question. "It's because you just saved my company from a potential disaster that our highest-paid engineers either missed or deliberately concealed. It's because you've demonstrated leadership capabilities that we desperately need at the executive level. The accident may have brought you to my attention, Ms. Grant, but this offer is based entirely on your proven capabilities." The sincerity in his assessment seemed genuine, yet Chloe remained cautious. The scars of previous corporate disillusionment still tender beneath the surface of professional consideration. 6 months transformed both Hayes' logistics and Chloe's circumstances with unexpected completeness. Her position as Director of Innovation and Safety Standards carried authority that extended across all production facilities, her reputation for uncompromising engineering standards and practical solutions earning respect from both management and floor technicians. The apartment with the swimming pool that Lila had once wistfully mentioned became their new home. Its proximity to both school and headquarters, reducing commute times and creating space for family dinners that had previously been sacrificed to long transit hours. Voss's attempt to claim credit for her work had resulted in his immediate termination. Hayes's zero-tolerance approach to ethical violations sending ripples through the corporate culture that reinforced the changing values under his leadership. Chloe's office adjoined the engineering department rather than occupying space in the executive wing. Her deliberate choice maintaining direct connection to the technical operations she oversaw, while symbolically bridging the traditional gap between management decisions and implementation realities. Her first major initiative, comprehensive safety reviews across all production facilities, uncovered similar compromises in multiple locations, validating Hayes's decision to create her position with authority that transcended traditional corporate hierarchies. The implementation of her standardized protocols gradually reversed production issues that had plagued the company for years. Quarterly reports reflecting financial improvements that transformed initial resistance from profit-focused executives into grudging appreciation for her methods and results. Spring sunshine filtered through the conference room windows as Chloe presented her latest innovations to the executive board, her confidence now firmly established through months of demonstrated success. Her proposal for worker-led quality circles, giving floor technicians direct input into process improvements, represented a fundamental shift in corporate philosophy that would have been unthinkable prior to her appointment. The people operating these machines daily have insights no engineer sitting in an office can replicate, she explained, addressing skeptical expressions from several board members. Harnessing their practical knowledge creates ownership of quality standards that monitoring systems can't achieve. Hayes watched from the head of the table, his support evident, though he allowed her to navigate the resistance without intervention. A professional respect that acknowledged her ability to defend her innovations without executive protection. The boardroom dynamic shifted when Richard Kessler raised predictable objections about implementation costs and return timelines. These participation programs create expectations of influence that extend beyond reasonable boundaries, he argued, his perspective representing traditional corporate hierarchies that Chloe's proposal directly challenged. Factory workers lack the broader financial context to make informed decisions about process modifications. The dismissive assessment of worker capabilities triggered a familiar spark of indignation that Chloe had learned to channel into effective advocacy rather than defensive reaction. With respect, Mr. Kessler, I was a factory worker who identified critical safety failures that board-approved engineers either missed or deliberately ignored, she countered, her tone professional but unyielding. Expertise exists at every level of this company if we create systems to recognize and utilize it effectively. The exchange continued with increasing intensity, Kessler's resistance gradually isolating him as other board members shifted toward tentative support for her evidence-based approach. Hayes remained silent throughout the debate, his attention alternating between Chloe's composed defense and Kessler's increasingly defensive objections. Only when the discussion reached natural conclusion did he finally interject, his question directed not at Chloe but at the dissenting executive. Richard, when was the last time you spent a full shift on our production floor? The inquiry carried no overt criticism, yet effectively highlighted the disconnect between executive decisions and operational realities that Chloe's proposal sought to bridge. Kessler's inability to answer directly created a silence that Hayes filled with decisive authority. We'll implement Ms. Grant's quality circles as proposed, beginning with the primary production facilities. Quarterly reviews will assess effectiveness before company-wide expansion. Later that evening, an unexpected text message interrupted Chloe's dinner preparation, Hayes requesting her input on a technical issue that had emerged at the Seattle facility. The communication reflected their evolving professional relationship, his recognition of her expertise now transcending formal meetings and scheduled consultations. Sorry to disturb your evening, he added as postscript. The consideration for her personal time, a marked departure from traditional corporate expectations of constant availability. She responded with brief analysis and a promise to examine the issue more thoroughly the following morning. The exchange completed with efficient respect for professional boundaries that had developed during their months of collaboration. Lila observed the interaction with perceptive interest, her 9-year-old wisdom increasingly attuned to the subtle shifts in her mother's professional confidence and personal equilibrium. "Is that your boss again?" she asked, setting plates on their small dining table with careful precision. "He texts you a lot." The observation carried no judgment, simply factual assessment delivered with childlike directness. Chloe considered the question thoughtfully, realizing that the traditional definition of boss no longer accurately described her professional relationship with Dominic Hayes. "He's the CEO," she explained, searching for words that would convey the nuanced evolution of their working dynamic. "But we're more like partners solving problems together now." The description felt surprisingly accurate. Their initial power imbalance gradually transformed through months of collaboration into something approaching mutual respect, his corporate authority complemented by her technical expertise in ways that created effective partnership rather than hierarchical direction. Lila nodded with apparent satisfaction at this explanation, her world increasingly stable after years of uncertainty, her understanding of adult relationships shaped by the professional respect she witnessed in her mother's new position. Dinner conversation drifted to school projects and swimming lessons. Ordinary family discussions that had once been overshadowed by financial anxieties, now replaced by comfortable security. Only as Chloe tucked Lila into bed did the child return to earlier thoughts with characteristic directness. "Mom, do you like Mr. Hayes? Not just for work, but like a friend?" The question carried innocent curiosity rather than suggestive implication. Yet it triggered unexpected self-reflection as Chloe considered the gradual evolution of her feelings toward the man she had once resented as the faceless architect of her professional downfall. Their shared focus on rebuilding company standards had created a foundation of professional respect that occasionally extended beyond strict business interactions, conversations that drifted from technical problems to broader philosophies, moments of unexpected humor amid corporate formality, growing appreciation for complementary strengths that created effective partnership across traditional boundaries of position and authority. "I think I do," she answered with similar honesty, the admission surprising herself as much as it satisfied her daughter's curiosity. "He's different than I thought he was when I only knew him as the CEO." The simple acknowledgement contained layers of reconciliation, with the company that had once discarded her, with the man whose signature had authorized that decision, and perhaps most significantly, with her own capacity to move beyond resentment toward new possibilities that neither forgot past injuries nor remained defined by them. As Lila drifted toward sleep, Chloe found herself contemplating this unexpected evolution, how a moment of crisis on a smoke-filled freeway had ultimately created opportunity for redemption that extended beyond individual circumstances to affect an entire corporate culture, restoring not only her professional standing, but also her faith in her own capacity to create meaningful change in systems she had once believed immutable. Autumn returned, completing the cycle of seasons since the fiery accident that had altered Chloe's trajectory with such unexpected finality. The company gathering at Hayes' lakeside home ostensibly celebrated record quarterly profits following implementation of Chloe's innovations, though the informal atmosphere suggested personal rather than professional motivation behind the invitation. Lila moved comfortably among executives and their families, her natural confidence blooming in environments that would have intimidated her mother just 1 year earlier. Chloe watched from the lakeside deck as her daughter engaged Hayes in animated conversation about her science project. His attentive interest neither condescending nor performative, but genuinely engaged with childlike enthusiasm that revealed dimensions of his character rarely visible in corporate settings. Their unlikely friendship had developed gradually over months of occasional interactions, weekend strategy sessions that sometimes extended to impromptu dinner invitations, professional boundaries softening into genuine connection that encompassed Lila with natural inclusion, rather than awkward accommodation. Victoria Landry approached with uncharacteristic informality, her professional reserve relaxed in the weekend setting. "He's different since the accident," she observed, following Chloe's gaze toward Hayes and Lila, who now examined something in the lake water with focused concentration. more present, less driven by quarterly metrics alone. The assessment from someone who had worked closely with Hayes for over a decade carried weight beyond casual observation, confirming changes Chloe had witnessed throughout their evolving professional relationship. Near-death experiences tend to shift perspectives, she replied, though she suspected the transformation extended beyond personal mortality awareness to deeper reconsiderations of corporate responsibility and human impact. Victoria nodded thoughtfully, her expression suggesting unspoken observations accumulated through years of proximity to Hayes's decision-making processes. Perhaps, but your influence has been equally significant. You've changed how he evaluates success, beyond financial metrics to human impact and sustainability. The conversation shifted to upcoming projects, professional discussion interspersed with personal observations that reflected their developing friendship beyond official roles. As afternoon transitioned toward evening, guests gradually departed until only Chloe, Lila, and a few core team members remained for casual dinner served on the spacious patio overlooking twilight waters. Hayes moved between host responsibilities with relaxed confidence that contrasted with his corporate formality, revealing facets of personality usually concealed behind professional requirements. Lila's unfiltered questions about his life before becoming CEO elicited surprising candor about early engineering aspirations abandoned for business education, at his father's insistence, personal history that contextualized his unusual technical knowledge, and genuine appreciation for Chloe's engineering expertise. I wanted to build things that lasted, he admitted with rueful reflection. Instead, I learned to manage spreadsheets and investor expectations. Later, after Lila had fallen asleep in the guest room Hayes had thoughtfully prepared for the possibility of late conversation, he and Chloe sat beside the fire pit watching flames dance with hypnotic rhythm against the darkened landscape. I've been thinking about legacy, he began, the quietness of his tone suggesting personal rather than professional consideration. About what remains when quarterly reports and stock prices are forgotten. The philosophical direction surprised her, though it aligned with gradual shifts she had observed in his leadership approach over recent months. Hayes Logistics was my father's company before mine, built on engineering excellence but gradually redirected toward profit maximization above all other considerations. I've perpetuated that shift without questioning its fundamental assumptions until recently. The admission carried personal accountability rather than abstract observation, a leader reassessing foundational values that had guided corporate decisions throughout his tenure. Chloe considered her response carefully, aware of the privilege and responsibility inherent in this unusual conversation between a CEO and former factory technician, now elevated to executive partnership. Companies reflect their leadership priorities, she finally observed, neither accusatory nor absolving. Values cascade through decisions at every level, especially when they're never explicitly articulated. Her assessment acknowledged corporate realities without absolving individual responsibility, a balance she had learned to maintain throughout their professional collaboration. Hayes nodded, accepting the implicit challenge in her observation, which raises questions about what those priorities should be moving forward. The statement hung between them, laden with implications that extended beyond immediate business considerations to fundamental questions of corporate purpose and human impact. The conversation meandered through possibilities, restructuring profit sharing to include factory workers, establishing educational programs for employee advancement, creating internships for single parents returning to workforce after caregiving gaps, each suggestion reflecting values, reorientation, rather than simple policy adjustment. These aren't charitable programs, Chloe emphasized as their discussion deepened. They're investments in human capital that benefit the company through reduced turnover, increased loyalty, and practical innovations that only emerge from diverse perspectives. Her framing transformed potentially controversial initiatives into business strategy, aligning human-centered values with corporate interests in ways that challenge traditional, either-or thinking about profit versus people. Hayes listened with evident appreciation for her practical approach to values implementation, his occasional questions probing logistical considerations rather than challenging foundational premises. As midnight approached, their conversation shifted from corporate philosophy to personal reflection, the unusual circumstances of their initial reconnection providing natural transition to more individual considerations. "I've wondered sometimes what would have happened if I hadn't been on that freeway that particular morning," Chloe admitted, watching ember sparks rise toward star-scattered darkness. "If someone else had pulled you from that car, or if I'd taken a different route to my interview." The counterfactual possibility hung between them, alternate timelines where their paths never reconnected, where Hayes' logistics continued without her influence, where her talents remained underutilized in jobs that barely covered basic necessities. He studied her across flickering firelight, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive of such speculative consideration. "I've had similar thoughts," he acknowledged, "about cosmic irony or karmic justice, being saved by someone my decisions had harmed, however indirectly and unintentionally." The admission created space for a question that had lingered unspoken throughout their months of collaboration. "Would you have hired me if we hadn't met through the accident? If my resume had simply appeared among hundreds of others during normal recruiting?" The inquiry sought honest assessment rather than reassurance, Chloe's hard-won confidence now secure enough to withstand uncomfortable truths about corporate realities she had navigated throughout her career. Hayes considered the question with characteristic thoroughness, neither rushing toward comforting platitudes nor defaulting to cynical resignation about hiring practices. "Our systems weren't designed to recognize talent outside traditional pathways," he finally answered, honesty taking precedence over self-protective denial. "Your application might have been filtered out by algorithms looking for recent employment in similar positions, rather than recognizing transferable skills from retail management back to engineering." The candid acknowledgement of systemic barriers might have once triggered bitter confirmation of corporate indifference. Instead, Chloe found herself appreciating the honesty that created foundation for actual change, rather than comforting illusions about meritocratic opportunities. "Then perhaps the real question is how to redesign those systems," she suggested, professional pragmatism transforming potential resentment into forward-looking problem-solving. "How many other Chloe Grants are currently stocking hardware store shelves or working retail counters because algorithms can't recognize their potential contributions?" The question expanded beyond personal circumstances to broader considerations of wasted talent and organizational blindness, challenges that aligned with their ongoing conversations about corporate responsibility and human capital development. As comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by occasional crackle from diminishing flames, Chloe realized how completely her perception of this man had transformed, from faceless corporate villain to complex human navigating competing responsibilities and reconsidering fundamental values in light of unexpected connection. The journey from that smoke-filled freeway to this moment of shared purpose contained lessons about judgment and opportunity, about resilience and reconciliation, about the possibility of systems change through individual relationship. Dominic Hayes was neither hero nor villain, but simply human, capable of both harmful decisions and genuine growth, of professional blindness and personal insight, of participating in flawed systems while simultaneously working to reform them from within. Her willingness to see this complexity, to engage beyond initial categories of victim and perpetrator, had created space for transformation that extended beyond individual circumstances to affect organizational culture with rippling impact through hundreds of lives connected to Hayes Logistics. The realization settled with surprising peace as she watched Lila sleeping during their drive home later that night, her daughter's future now expanding with opportunities that seemed impossible during their darkest post-layoff days. Their journey from financial precarity to professional restoration contained no magical resolution or perfect justice, simply human beings navigating imperfect systems with growing awareness of interconnection and responsibility. The fire that had initially brought them together had burned away illusions on both sides. corporate assumptions about dispensable employees and personal judgments about callous executives, revealing more complex truths about institutional constraints and individual capacity for change. What remained after those flames subsided was neither perfect redemption nor complete absolution, but something more authentically human. The possibility of moving forward with greater wisdom, creating systems that recognized inherent value beyond spreadsheet calculations, and building relationships that transcended traditional hierarchies to create genuine collaboration toward shared purpose.